Fantastic. Yeah. Thanks everyone for joining. Sorry, apologies, we're running a little bit late. Yeah, so we have got two speakers tonight, both from Wildlife and Wetlands Trust. First person that's going to be speaking is Jordan, kind of talking about yeah, the ecology of curlews and kind of where the head starting came around. And then we've got a presentation by Tanya that sort of talks a bit more about how that works. And then we'll do a question and answer session at the end. So if everyone's ready, we'll kick off when you're ready, Jordan.
Perfect. Can you all hear me okay?
We're getting thumbs up. That's a good sign.
Yeah, perfect, perfect. Yeah, I can only see my presentation, so I can't actually see anyone else's faces, but yeah, hopefully I won't bore you to death. So yeah, I'm Jordan Podger. So I was the Curlew monitoring officer on Dartmoor last year for WWT. So that's just who I am, and I've kind of got a first half that just talks a bit about Eurasian curlews and a bit of background on them. So they are probably pretty well known to everyone in this group. They are the largest wading bird in the UK, coming in at around 830 grams, but that varies, with a wingspan of about 90 centimeters, and they can stand about 55 centimeters tall. And with regards to the etymology of the Latin name, Numenius arquata, the Numenius refers to the genus. This genus is shared by 9 other species worldwide, and one of those other genuses is the Wimbrel, which, as you all know, can very often get confused with the curlew on particularly on an estuary. And the arquata part of it is what's known as a specific epithet, or it's basically a descriptive term that most genuses have at the end. And arquata stands for bow-shaped, referring to that beautiful long bill that they've got. Yeah, so it's a really lovely, very poetic name. And talking about breeding curlews in the UK, so the population, fortunately, has declined over the past 25 years, with estimates of about 48%. So roughly half of the population breeding curlews in the UK have declined, which is obviously absolutely tragic to hear. And with one study finding in 2016 that we had about 58,500 pairs still remaining. In 2007, the curlew moved from nearly threatened, sorry, on the IUCN Red List of threatened species, and on the UK Bird of Conservation Concern, they were ranked as red listed. So kind of all those factors together has led curlews to now being what's classed as the UK's highest bird of conservation concern. So it begs the question, what's occurring really? Why is this happening? So there's a number of factors really, but the adult mortality, oddly, is really high in adult curlews, but it kind of masks the problem. So the adult mortality is at 0.9, which basically refers to how many birds survive each year. So you're looking at like 90% survival rate for an adult year on year. They averagely live to about 11 years old, with some ringing records actually finding some curlews living to 32 years old. So they can live a really long time. But what's also happening in the background is they've got really low productivity. So the required productivity for a healthy population would be about 0.48 to 0.62. The curlews are 0.23. So these numbers basically are referring to how many chicks per nest need to survive each year to have a viable population. So it needs to be, yeah, one in every few nests. So the current rate is 1 chick for every 4 nests. That's account for 4 eggs per clutch per nest. So basically 1 in every 16 curlews are surviving, which, as you can imagine, it's just a terribly low number, and it's not going to create a viable population. So what's kind of causing this problem is there's a few different reasons really. The main driver is predation. So yeah, the nest survival is really quite low. There's quite a few studies that have gone into this to try and figure out what the main cause of decline is. With one study where they looked at 32 nests, and 29 of them actually ended up failing due to red fox as the main predator. There's also other predators at hand, others being corvids. The Severn Avon Vale in particular another project that is looking at curlews at WWT, they found real high corvid predation. And the kind of second cause is habitat loss. So some of the reasons for this habitat loss are either intensified agriculture or forestry. And this is creating an increase in like generalist abundance of generalist predators. So they call them mesopredators, kind of mid-tier predators that are basically hoovering up all the ground nesting birds. And we've kind of got this homogenized nature of agriculture now, and it results in this kind of sward height that is like homogenized. So the varying degrees of sward height would provide different cover and stuff, but it really opens up the vulnerability for predators having it all at one height. So that's kind of a factor that's really affecting it too. But predation is the real main cause. So zooming further in still, looking into Dartmoor specifically, at the moment there is roughly only 2 known pairs of breeding curlew on Dartmoor. So Dartmoor used to be a real stronghold for breeding curlews, with between like 25 to 30 pairs once upon a time. And yeah, in the 2024 season, we only managed to establish 2 breeding pairs. There's kind of 2 main territories on the east side of Dartmoor. But despite these 2 known pairs, 0 nests were actually found and 0 fledglings were observed. So it would suggest that on Dartmoor in 2024 there were no new birds, which is obviously a real shame. When it comes to monitoring Dartmoor, as you can imagine, it's such a vast place. It's really quite difficult to access a lot of the areas. So one of the other options we tried was deploying audio moths. They're basically like an omnidirectional audio device. They're actually really, really clever piece of kit, and they can be left out for 3 to 4 weeks, and then we can run them through an application called BirdNet Analyzer, and that can actually detect calls of specific species. And in the 2024 season, I actually managed to find a bird up in the north that we weren't really sure was there. So there are definitely more birds out there on Dartmoor. It's just really quite difficult to monitor. And I also put out, some of you may have even seen it, social media posts around trying to help find wild curlews. And we had quite a lot of sightings from that, surprisingly. A lot of them in the south. Many of them were already from known areas, but quite a few were different regions in the south and a couple up north. So yeah, it's kind of really opening up the possibility of more curlews being on Dartmoor, but trying to narrow down nests and prove that they're breeding is really quite difficult. And not just Dartmoor, but there are also breeding curlews on Bodmin. So I went to Bodmin, wasn't really in my scope last season, but it kind of became aware to me partway through the season, so I did take a look. And we did, well, I personally observed 11 individuals, all at different times, with the biggest group I spotted was 5 individuals, and 2 of them at that one time were actually head-started birds, and we managed to confirm one of the birds from being a 2022 Dartmoor head-started bird. So obviously this is absolutely huge news, and it means that they are surviving and coming back and actually intermingling with wild birds, and hopefully breeding. So what we'd like to do in the future really on Bodmin is try and take a more a stronger look at Bodmin, and try and make it a bit more an official survey and try and nail down the birds on Bodmin. But yeah, so then it begs the question, what are WWT doing about this? So I'll pass over to Tan now, and she can talk to you a bit more about what we're doing with regards to head starting.
Is now the time you want me to share your presentation, Tanya? Is that right? Just checking.
Tanya Grigg. I work for WWT Slimbridge as an aviculturalist. In recent years, I've worked on the Grey Crane project, the captive spoonbill sandpipers.
We can't quite see your screen just yet.
Madagascar potsherd.
Does it come up now? Yeah, perfect. Sorry.
Tanya Grigg. I work for WWT Slimbridge as an aviculturalist. In recent years, I've worked on the Grey Crane project, the captive spoonbill sandpipers, Project Godwit, Madagascar potsherd, the Severn and Avon Vale Curlew project, and most recently, the Dartmoor Curlew Recovery project. Today, I'm going to briefly chat through all the avicultural aspects of the Dartmoor Curlew Recovery project with you, from egg collections through to release. With all our head starting projects, we like to do a pilot or trial year ahead of going into the field to work. So in 2019, we collected eggs from RAF bases and incubated, hatched and reared 51 curlew. These were released in our centre at Slimbridge onto the Severn estuary. I'm talking to you today about the head starting aspect of the project, which is just a small part of the project. We work with project partners such as the King's Charitable Fund, the Duchy of Cornwall, Dartmoor National Parks, Natural England, RSPB, and the RAF for the wider project. Season starts in March when we put out adverts for seasonal wardens to work with us, and then we'll interview for them. The next job is to spend some time on Dartmoor preparing the aviaries. These are left up year round, so they'll usually need mowing, some strimming, and possibly painting of the wood, and just a few general repairs ahead of them being ready to receive birds. I'm now going to quickly talk to you about egg collections. As I mentioned earlier, we work closely with the RAF, and in fact, all the eggs for the Dartmoor Curlew Recovery Project have come from RAF air bases, largely in the east of England. Unfortunately, in the past, eggs have had to be destroyed under licence as the adults pose a threat to aircraft. And you can see in the photo on the left just how close curlew will lay to a runway. The photo on the right is just to show an amazing team at the RAF bases, the Phoenix bird control people. They have fantastic fieldwork skills, and they find the nests for us. From early April, we're in regular contact with the Phoenix staff at the RAF bases. They'll let us know when pairs start to arrive and then once they start nesting. We'll usually get a phone call early in the morning to say they've found a nest, and then we'll discuss with the staff when it needs to be collected. Sometimes if they're very close to a runway, it may just be a 2 or 3 egg clutch that we collect, but the parents pose such a risk to the aircraft that it needs to be destroyed almost straight away. Best case scenario is that we can wait for a full clutch to be laid out, and then we'll go and collect them. When we arrive at the base, we'll be met by one of the Phoenix staff who will have a what 3 words on his phone with the location of the nest, and he'll take us to the nest. We'll collect all the eggs and mark them individually, so they'll be marked with a clutch number and an egg number, and then placed into a portable incubator. This is basically a box that's heated to 36 degrees to travel eggs, and within the box there's trays with foam cups to sit the eggs into. This is run off a 12-volt battery and can be transported in the back of a car. You'll see in the right-hand picture, we have foam under the portable incubators and at the back. This is to try and reduce any vibration or shock as we're driving. We drive it incredibly slowly and carefully with the precious cargo. And then they're put in place with seat belts and bungee cords to support them. Travel the eggs back to our biosecure quarantine facility. And when we arrive, we'll candle all the eggs, which is shining a bright light through the blunt end of the egg. We're checking for any abnormalities within the egg, any hairline cracks on the shell, or any sort of dead or addled eggs. Also, any infertile eggs. Any eggs that we're slightly worried about, we put in a separate incubator. Wader eggs are very difficult to candle. As you can see, they're heavily patterned, so it's not always easy to see within the egg. The diagram on the right shows you they're duck eggs, so they're very easy to candle. They're a uniform colour, there's no patterning. But I put this on here to show not only the embryo development, but the fact that the airspace gets bigger as the embryo develops. And when you're candling, you'll also be looking for that airspace getting bigger. You can actually draw it on the eggshell, and then you can see over time it gets bigger and bigger, which is a good indication you've got a healthy embryo. We'll also weigh and measure all our eggs. We'll make sure we weigh the eggs the day we collect them, but we won't always measure them that day. Weights change during incubation, but obviously the measurements won't, so it's okay to wait until the next day, especially if it's been a long journey for the eggs. These pictures show our incubation room and the incubators we use. We use RCOM 50s, which we found really good for Wader eggs, but there are lots of other incubators available on the market. This is a closer look at one of our RCOM 50 incubators. So we set them at 37.5 degrees centigrade, and we'll start all the eggs off at around 50% relative humidity, although this may change during incubation. We've got some spot check thermometers in there which help us map temperature across the incubator, just to keep an eye that there's no fluctuation from one side to the other. The eggs sit in plastic cups, and there's a tray underneath that will roll. This will turn the eggs 180 degrees every 40 minutes. So they'll roll one way and then 40 minutes later roll back the other way. Once you have a weight and a length and breadth measurement for each egg, you can plot this onto a weight loss chart. So every egg will have its own chart, and we weigh the eggs every 2 days. You can see these eggs have been pretty much on the expected 15% weight loss throughout their incubation. If we have an egg that's not losing enough weight, we would put that into a drier incubator, say about 35 to 40% relative humidity. And if you have an egg that's losing too much, you'd put them into a high humidity incubator, which can be up to 17% relative humidity. Eggs get to about 27 days into incubation. The chick will push through the internal membranes into the airspace at the blunt end of the egg, and then start to chip away at the shell with its egg tooth. It's not a great photo, but you may be able to see some external chip marks that are on the eggs on the right-hand side. So I've put a small circle around each chip mark and a day and a time on there. We do this because Wader eggs take a long time to hatch, up to 74 hours sometimes from externally pipping. So we'll mark that on there so that if they go past 74 hours, we might think about intervening and helping them to hatch, but this is very rare. So the photo on the left shows one of the RCOM incubators, which we've converted into a hatcher. So we've taken the cups out and stopped it rolling at this stage, and we leave them in clutches. Obviously the lid's not on this one, the lid would be on it. So they're in their clutch groups and will stay in there until they hatch. When the eggs are in the hatcher, we'll keep the humidity high. This is to try and stop the membranes within the egg drying out, which could make it more difficult for the chick to hatch. You can see on the photo on the left, waders aren't like ducks or chickens where they make a nice little, go all the way around the top of the egg and make a nice little cup and then push out. They make a hole, a chip, which slowly gets pushed open with their legs and feet, and they'll just explode out of the egg. The chick on the right is obviously newly hatched. It's still damp and very tired. So we'll put that into a brooder with its clutch mates and let them dry out, fluff up for about 12 hours until they're up on their feet. We send all our eggshells off to Sheffield University for analysis, and they can tell us things like egg shell thickness and any eggs that haven't hatched. They can give us a good indication as to why they haven't hatched, especially if they're infertile or very early deaths. Once the chicks internally pip, they start calling, and you can hear them. They're call to their clutch mates, but also if the parent's incubating, you can hear them contact calling to the chicks within the eggs. Once the chicks are around 12 hours old, they'll be up on their feet, pecking at things and starting to look for food. So we'll give them a drink, and then we'll move them into a small indoor coop. But you can see they quickly tire. Once they've had a wander around and explore, they're back asleep under the heat lamp. We feed the birds a Lundy pellet. This is imported from Germany, and we give them the micro, the very small pellet, and it's a 35% protein. Over the years, we've tried different diets, but found this is the best one. We get the best results with this anyway. We've also added in things like mealworms and crickets over the years, but the birds, as soon as they're about 12 hours old, they're up on their feet, they're looking for food. They'll just very quickly go on to the Lundy diet, and there's no need to add in other things which could off-balance the protein levels. So we stick to just the Lundy. And obviously, once they're outside, they're naturally foraging. In the pen, there are lots of earthworms and beetles and bugs, so that they're getting a lot of natural live food anyway. Every day, we also add AviPro to the bird's food. It's a soluble probiotic and a multivitamin, so this ensures the birds get the best possible start. Pictures show our indoor rearing coops. The picture on the left is for very young chicks, probably just the first day that they're in there. They're just given half a coop, and they've just got food and water in there. There's a heat lamp, and this is about 35 degrees if they're sat directly underneath it, and a UV lamp. We give them a UV lamp because there's no natural daylight within our rearing area. The picture on the right shows the chicks with the full coop. They still have the UV and the heat lamp, but gradually, day by day, we will raise the heat lamp to make it cooler within the coop, and this is to prepare them for going outside. You can see they've got a large dish and two small dishes, and also actually they've got a dish with some just dried food in. We put food within the water as the chicks like to. It's a little bit more enriching. They like to probe around the stones in the dish and feed. From a very young age, wild chicks will be walking long distances with their parents, searching for food. So it's very important to move the chicks on quickly. So by day 4 or 5, we'll be moving them outside. The photo on the left shows the first stage of outdoor rearing. There's a small dog kennel coop, and then a fenced off area of grass for them, so they can straight away go out and start foraging. There's a water drinker and several food dishes within the grassy area. When we first put the chicks outside, we'll shut them in the coop for around 20 minutes. And this is just so that they get used to where the heat lamp is. There's food in there as well. After this, we don't shut the curlews in, even if it's rainy, cold, they will put themselves back to bed. This is important because we can't be there 24 hours a day, and we don't want to restrict their exercise. So as soon as the sun's up, they will be outside foraging and walking around, exercising. The picture on the right shows the chicks. They're probably 5 or 6 days old, and they're all out there foraging. Once the chicks are outside, one of the first things they love to do is take a bath. It's very important that the chicks get lots of exercise to help them develop correctly. So with this in mind, every day we enlarge their outdoor rearing areas. and very quickly we'll start mixing broods. So around about day 8 or 9, to allow them to have enough space, we'll mix 2 broods together. Projects based high up on the moors, and the weather can be really unpredictable. We can be sat in high temperatures, bright sunshine one day, and then for the next week be sat in the clouds. When it's sunny, it's very important to provide shaded areas in the pens for the birds, especially when they're young and developing. We do this with shade cloth on road pins, which means we can move it around the pen as the sun moves from east to west. The birds actually seem to thrive well in these conditions and quite like the rain. As the chicks grow, their shallow water dishes will be replaced by deep trays. They love to have a good bath, especially on warmer days, and then after this, they'll spend a long time preening. Chicks are around 21 days. Our vet from Slimbridge will come to assess them and give them a health check. She'll check their heart, their lungs, their eyes, their legs and feet, their general feather condition, their body condition. We'll weigh them. We'll check that they're bright, alert and reactive, and then they'll be swabbed for avian influenza and Newcastle's disease. We do this when they're around 21 days so that all the results can be back ahead of any releases. Each curlew is fitted with a metal BTO ring. You have a yellow flat ring on the right leg, a yellow flag over a green flat ring on the left leg, and each flag has an individual number letter combination. We assess the birds individually to decide when they're ready for a release. We like them to be flying well within the aviary, but also to have put some body condition on after growing in their feathers. I think the average would be 55 days old now when we release the birds, but in the past we have released them younger than this, and obviously we have released some birds older than this. Speak to you shortly about post-release monitoring, but I just wanted to show you these pictures. In 2024, we were lucky to be able to fit most of our birds with either radio tags or satellite GPS tags. These have been invaluable in telling us what our birds do next and where they go after release. On the Dartmoor Curlew Recovery Project, we've done a mixture of soft and hard releases of the birds. These photos show our release aviary on Dartmoor. The idea is that we catch the birds in their rearing aviary and transport them to the release aviary, sometimes the day before or the morning of release. And then when we're ready, we just take the one end of the aviary down and the birds can go by themselves. You get a mixture of some birds just flying out and going, and some will just wander out and start feeding straight away. We've also hard released some of the Dartmoor birds. This involves catching the birds from the rearing aviary, placing them in cardboard boxes, which have a carpeted base, air holes, and a sliding panel at the front so that we can slide it up and check the birds are okay inside. This has a plastic sheet across the front, so it's see-through. We then transport them to a close-by field and lift them out of the boxes and release them. Again, some will wander away and start feeding, and some will just fly. On our head starting projects, we aim to release 25 birds each year. You can see in 2021, we released 33 birds. We were lucky that year to be able to collect a good amount of eggs. And they have got harder to come by as the years have gone on, as there are now other projects using RAF eggs as well. In 2022, we released 28 birds, in 2023, unfortunately, all the curlew projects had a bad year. We're not really sure if that was due to high temperatures early in the season or the fact that it was very wet during the egg laying season. In 2024, we're back up to releasing 25 birds, and we hope in 2025 we will be able to do the same. I've put this slide in to show, obviously, we do get the occasional issues during growth and development. So the chick on the left hatched with quite curled vent toes, which regularly they do, but usually within about 12 hours they've straightened up and they're fine. This little one got to about 15, maybe even 20 hours, and they haven't straightened out. So we put some small splints on them. These are from the centre of a cotton earbud. We've trimmed them down and then micropored them to his toes. And he would have had those on for about 12 hours. And once they were taken off, his toes were absolutely fine. And he went on, obviously, to grow on well, and he was released. The two chicks on the right here are from the same clutch. They were the only two that we had that, as they developed, they grew very quickly and had quite droopy wings. So I've just taped them up. And they're sort of taped in a figure of 8 and up over their back to hold the wing up in place. And they were left on for 12 hours and then taken off. The one bird stayed perfectly well and the other ones drooped again. So I repeated that for a further 12 hours on that bird. And yeah, absolutely fine. Both developed very well after that and were both released.
Fantastic. Thanks, Tanya. Jordan, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I've just got another little bit about what we do post-release, really. So I'll just present that now. It's not too long, so I'll keep you
Perfect, thank
waiting.
you.
Let's just... Okay. And how does that look? Can you just see the main slide there?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, so obviously after all the birds have been released in the 2024 season, are responsible for the kind of post-release monitoring of the birds. So as Tanya mentioned, we did what they refer to as a hard release, where we translocated them from their original aviary. It was only a short distance, but we decided to release them in a nearby field. And in doing so, we erected a 1,000-meter electric fence that kind of covered the whole circumference of this field, and that was just to give them a safe space for if they did choose to reside and not fly straight off, they would have some mammalian protection from mammalian predators for the most part. We ended up releasing 25 birds, as Tan said, in 4 different release windows, mainly due to the variation in development, trying to group them based on hatch date or developmental things. And as Tan also mentioned, we fitted some birds with radio tags and some with GPS tags. So we ended up fitting 11 of the 25 birds with radio tags and 2 of them with GPS tags. So as you can imagine, the GPS tags are really quite useful. They give you information every 2 to 8 hours, depending on how you can change the programming to update as frequently as you need it, depending on battery life, etc. But they're all solar panel powered. And the ironic part of this GPS, the 2 GPS tagged birds, they are some of the most the 2 birds that hung around the most in the most obvious areas where we needed to release them. So their need for GPS tagging was the least needed out of all the birds for a while, but it turned out later on it became really quite useful. So yeah, post-release monitoring. As Tan showed you, those little radio tags that are glued onto the back, they're basically glued onto the juveniles in between their wings, and they eventually fall off when they molt. But it can last for 2 to 4 weeks on their backs. And in conjunction with these radio trackers, which Nikki, who's one of the aviculturists, is holding in this picture, we can kind of locate them within a few hundred meters. So you can have a really cast a really wide net for that specific signal, and then you can hone in on where that individual bird is, and it's really quite useful. It's quite difficult to get used to, but yeah, it was a very useful tool out in the field. The GPS tagged birds, there was actually an app you can use where you can track them. So every day I'll be checking that just to see where they were, and they were usually in the last place we saw them. But yeah, that was also really useful because they did end up grouping together a few of the birds that were released, so that's quite interesting. And if we knew where one of the GPS birds were, we could go and find them, and they were often with some of the birds. And the third thing we did was just good old fashioned field work, really, just out with a pair of binoculars and a scope, and just literally manually scanning neighbouring fields of where we released them, and just looking for leg flags if we could find them. Yeah, which proved pretty useful. So this is just a bit of a table that shows you all the times and the days in which I managed to observe them. So all the red is didn't see them, and all the green is if I did see them, how many times I saw them. So, and it's in order of release cohorts. So you can see that quite a few birds actually just lifted off and took with the wind and did not turn back. So they're all the ones that we're hoping just flew straight to an estuary and knew exactly what to do. And then we had quite a few different birds from each of the cohorts that kind of stuck around for a little bit. And this is pretty common, as they've obviously gone from their entire life inside an aviary with no wild curlew guidance to now being out in the wild. So there is a bit of an adjustment period, definitely. So this is where kind of a visual representation of each release and where they hung around. And as you can see, they kind of hung around a lot together. Whether they would be in the same place at the same time or whether they would kind of cycle through the same fields together, it was pretty common. But all the birds that did stick around after the release, this is kind of their rough movements. So this is a really interesting diagram of the known birds and where they went after release. So the picture on the left is kind of a zoomed in part of the southwest of England. And as you can see, the different letter and number combinations are the leg flags and where they've been spotted post-release. So all of these birds are released in early August, and then we've got quite a few sightings on different estuaries afterwards, which was really exciting. And then we were lucky enough to have a few birds actually left the mainland and headed south, mainly towards Spain. So we had a few birds on the coast of Spain, and this real thick line here you can see is the GPS tagged birds. So they obviously gave a lot more information as they were making their migration, or even when they just moved along the coast. So this bird actually moved down complete the side coast of Portugal and ended up residing right in the bottom of Spain, which I think if I was going to go on holiday, that's where I'd choose to go as well. Yeah, so in total we've had 13 birds of that original 25 released confirmed at neighbouring estuaries, or like these birds that have gone to Spain, we've had 13 total birds confirmed sightings, which is incredible. So more than half of the group have actually been resighted. So that's really exciting for us and very motivating. So with regards to what do we hope for now? So curlews have what they know as site faithfulness. So the idea is that where they're born, they tend to return to breed. So the idea is that hatching them and rearing them on Dartmoor and releasing them on Dartmoor means that they should hopefully come back and try and reinvigorate the population, really. They potentially go to nearby estuaries, recruit wild birds, and then the idea is that they come back and try and breed again. Yeah, that's the main aim anyway. But yeah, as I say, the scale of Dartmoor makes it really difficult to monitor really accurately. And there's a lot of footfall from general walkers and ramblers, and even enthusiasts like yourself who spend a lot of time at estuaries, who get a real sight on the ground of if you see any birds with leg flags or anything like that, there is a way to contact us and let us know. And that's the email just there. So if you do see any curlews with leg flags on, please do let us know. And if you're ever on Dartmoor and you just hear or see or anything to do with the curlew, please let us know. It'd all be really helpful information, and yeah, can hopefully contribute to our research going forward. But yeah, thanks very much for listening.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jordan, and thanks, Tanya. That was really, really interesting, and we, I'm sure we've got lots of questions. So if you're happy, I'd like to invite anyone that has any questions to, yeah, fire away, please. So Bruce has got a question. I think you're muted, Bruce.
Right, sorry about that. Yeah, my question concerns biosecurity. I was project officer for the Searle bunting reintroduction project in Cornwall, and we were involved with taking young Searle bunting chicks and hand rearing them in a similar fashion that you've been with curlews. We found that on occasion we got outbreaks of Campylobacter, which decimated the chicks. This happened in perhaps 2 years out of about 8 years of the project. And I noted that your chicks were walking around on the same piece of grass, although you enlarged the grass areas, and they were obviously defecating droppings in that area, which is how Campylobacter was transferred in our Searle bunting chicks. And I wondered whether you'd had any issues with biosecurity and diseases caused by that sort of thing.
You happy for me to answer, Jordan?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So we fecal sample the chicks so that we take some samples when they're inside, which 9 times out of 10 come back clear because obviously they've not had any, they've not come into contact with anything. And then once they're outside, we will fecal sample them again once they've been outside for a week, and then once they've been outside for 3 weeks. Now we do get things come back, and obviously we're based on a farm, so there are environmental, so it's runoff and birds flying over, so there is disease and sort of nasties in the ground. We occasionally get Campylobacter, but we actually go into the pens and pick up the poo several times a day. So we're constantly cleaning it. So we do because it's quite a small area with 4 chicks, so that all their coop gets cleaned out twice a day, and we poo pick on the grass as well to try and keep the burden down. We do worm counts as well, and yeah, we've got a vet on. So Rosa, the lady that you saw taking the swabs, she's on hand and visits regularly. But yeah, we get a lot of information coming back from these fecal sampling.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's good.
I've actually got a question for you. It's about the movement patterns that you found, Jordan, which is obviously I noticed on the map that one of the birds that went to Spain sort of did a southerly movement over the sea. Does that mirror kind of untampered with populations? Is that kind of the same movement, or do they tend to kind of move down through the continent and kind of coast around France and down?
Yeah, so they all have their own minds, so they tend to do whatever they wish. But we know that where they're residing currently in South Spain, there is another cohort of curlew there. So it would typically be probably a pretty normal movement pattern for curlews. It's obviously really difficult to monitor ones that have fledged in England and then where they've gone to after that without GPS tagging them. So that's quite difficult. But yeah, it's a pretty normal movement for a curlew, I'd say. Yeah.
Yeah, there was actually one caught and rung, a young bird caught and rung in the Severn and Avon Vale, a wild chick, and that had a tag fitted, and it did exactly the same movement.
Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting because yeah, I was just curious as to obviously, with the birds on Dartmoor, some of them are turning up on Bodmin Moor, and I think, the expectation is that perhaps that's where they'll end up breeding, and it's whether, they do something completely different to that naturally wild population, and whether that changes things in the future. But if they're already kind of mirroring those same flyways, etc., that's probably less of a worry, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And if they don't end up residing on Dartmoor, just contributing to the population is, for us a success regardless. So yeah, the hope is that they do, but if they don't and they survive, then we're happy either way.
Yeah, I think we've got to remember that these eggs, ahead of us having the eggs, they were being put in the bin. Unfortunately, they were under license being destroyed. So to be able to take those eggs and them contributing to any curlew population is a good thing. Obviously, it would be amazing to have them come back to Dartmoor, but yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. I don't know if she's going to be comfortable speaking, but I think Jenny Hale's probably in a better position to talk about this than I am. But there has actually recently been a Curlew group formed, which I'm not sure. We've literally had one meeting so far, but perhaps Jenny, if you're happy to, would you explain a bit more about the group? Jenny is co-chairing it with Bob Zisto, the county recorder. So yeah, early days. But Jenny, please tell us more.
Well, I wasn't going to speak today.
Sorry, apologies.
I wasn't even going to put my video on. Okay, I've been monitoring breeding curlews on Bodmin Moor for the last 7 years, so coming up to the 8th year, and it started off with just a few pairs that were breeding, and whether I've got better at tracking them and finding out what's going on, or there has been an increase. I've now last year counted 7 to 8 pairs, and I knew I wasn't double counting because at the time I was hearing them kicking off from the spot I was standing in, so I could actually hear where the different birds were, and I've been sending my records to the Curlew recovery program, and I've also been up to the Head Starting project, which is really fascinating on Dartmoor, and coordinated things with Jordan and John Avon, and John came down to see me, and Jordan turned up just as 7 birds, one of which was a Wimbrel, or was it 2 Wimbrel?
Yeah, I think there's 2 or 3. Yeah.
Literally turned up on the spot. I actually thanked the curlews afterwards because because they just showed John and Jordan just what was happening here, and to their amazement there was a yellow flagged bird. So basically the group is to sort of expand the area that we're capable of looking in. I go out really early in the morning, often just before dawn, and cycle up the side of where I live and note everything that I see, but I can't be everywhere. So what I'm hoping with the Curlew group is that we can expand it across Bodmin Moor and looking in suitable habitats. So really any records of curlew that's seen in the early part of the year is really, really important. And one of the things I'm really interested in finding out is where historically birds have bred or are turning up in the early part of the year, in February even, and the habitat might not be suitable for them, but they are turning up. So they've historically got a presence there, and that would be really, really important, because we can then look at the state of the agriculture that's going on there and the state of the land, and seeing if there's any way of improving. So really it's about gathering information and trying to put it all together and looking out for these flagged birds. It was really interesting that these birds had joined the wild population down here. Didn't actually see any later in the season, but that doesn't mean they weren't there, because once they're brooding or have got nests, they're very, very secretive, and it becomes really, really hard to pinpoint anything. And we did have a very late brood that successfully reared 2 chicks after what I thought was a really dismal year where we had no success. But fingers crossed we'll have a good 2025. Is that all right?
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. I'm sorry to put you on the spot like that. I think, yeah, one thing the group is also looking at is those older historical breeding populations, most notably the lizard as well, which, recently lost breeding curlew, and whether there's any hope that we could actually, do some habitat works or even, long term, whether it might be somewhere WWT looks at head starting again, because in all fairness, the habitat probably isn't that bad down there. But yeah, we're going to be looking at obviously the breeding on Bodmin Moor and the lizard and other historical areas, but also kind of one thing that's become apparent is actually how important Cornwall is as a wintering ground for curlew as well. And I think Jordan and Tanya will agree that quite a lot of tag birds are found on estuaries throughout the winter system as well. So it's kind of monitoring that whole curlew activity within Cornwall on a yearly basis, and kind of just a more concerted effort to make sure that we are monitoring them and feeding back to the right people, and if needs be, and if we can, try and put some improvements in place to keep it that way. So it's exciting, but like I say, early days, and as the group progresses and we get some more structured stuff involved, and when we need help, that will be advertised through our website and social media channels moving forward. Brilliant. Is there any more questions from anyone? Please feel free to just shout out. You'll only have one opportunity to speak to Tanya and Jordan like this, so now's a good time.
I have a question, if that's okay.
Of course, Jeff.
It was about the audio use, so the recordings that you can take back and process them via the software that can identify the curlew. How much scope is there for that sort of moving forward with the project? How far can those microphones capture that information? And how far apart would you need them to cover a broad area?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, and it kind of hadn't really been explored to a great extent until I came last year. So I know that the RSPB are utilising them quite a lot. So through my research, I think they can cover so that the audio moths that I showed you in there are actually 2 audio moths in tandem, recording at different frequencies that are in like a custom-built housing, and it's all, there's a company called Wild Connect that make those boxes, but I think they're like £250–300, but I don't know whether they make them on demand. Outside of that, they're a very fiddly thing to operate. I don't know whether you've had any experience yourself with them, but they are like considerably unreliable. But that being said, when they actually do work, they are incredible. So from my research, I think they have about a 700-meter radius where they're effective, and that's all depending on how well you've programmed them. So I have a bit of a fantasy about trying to make a web of them across Dartmoor if possible, but again, accessibility, and they're unreliable, and also cattle absolutely love them, and they love to try and scratch them and then realize that they just topple instantly. So quite a few times I've come back and they've been face down under some heather or whatever. So yeah, that's also a problem, especially when there's just wild roaming cattle. But when they work, they're really, really good. And this BirdNet analyzer is also really good and free, and it basically does most of the work for you. And you can just submit it, and it doesn't just give you curlew; it will give you every species it successfully identifies that you want it to. Again, that's with varying degrees of success, but let's say it narrows down 15 audio recordings. That's enough for me to go through and listen one by one and confirm or deny. It likes to think that a lamb bleating sounds like a curlew too. So you have to go through them. But we have found success, and I know that someone at the RSPB who uses them, he's found curlew that way too. So I think there's a lot of untapped potential. I went to a Curlew forum last year, and there are people really trying to utilize audio moths. Yeah, so I know there's other audio devices too that do a similar job, but yeah, audio moths are relatively cheap. Another problem with them is they're kind of like a crowdfunded thing, so they only sell them in batches. Of once they've accrued enough crowdfunding, then they release the batches of audio moths, so they're quite difficult to obtain. So yeah, there's a lot of factors with them.
Sorry to jump in,
but very
Jordan.
useful. Go ahead.
I don't know if the technologies how different it is, but I know Wildlife Acoustics do a similar device called the Song Meter,
Yeah.
which is about 150 quid a box, and I would imagine it's got similar capabilities. It's the same sort of size and that, so it might be if people are interested in you know getting their own devices, that might be a good one to look at. And I know that they do a lot of support for customers that want to use this stuff for particular things, so it might be an option to look at that's more readily available.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree. I've heard of song meters. It's just I had access to audio moths this year, but yeah, they are really useful, and I think especially on a landscape like Dartmoor, where there's two main roads that go through it and intersect, and the rest of it is just really untrodden. There is a lot of footfall, obviously, in the Northern Territories, but I just think an array of these things. I also wonder if you could triangulate using them. So if you've got an array of them and three of them pick up the sound, can you kind of triangulate then based off those three? It's roughly in this perimeter. Yeah, I don't know that yet, and something I would like to explore, but very interesting.
Thank you. Yeah, Bruce has had his hand up for a while. I don't know if you want to jump in there, Bruce.
Yeah, can you hear me this time? Okay. Mine was about the longevity of the project. Obviously, there's a finite time that the project on Dartmoor is scheduled for. And what is there any plans to extend the project, or what will happen after the project ends to the nests that are on RAF sites? Will they go back to just destroying the eggs? It'd be a shame to lose those eggs if the project ended.
We've got funding for one more year on Dartmoor, but there is that. So the Natural England fund a project in the east of England, so at Sandringham and Kenhill. So that there's that will be ongoing. They've got funding for several years. We're hoping to look for more funding. I don't know whether that will be to carry on Dartmoor or other projects. But yeah, the eggs won't be thrown away again. There's definitely plenty of projects that will take them.
Yeah, it's good to hear.
Yeah, and there's people that are employed by the Duchy as well that will carry on. If we don't, as WWT, carry on with the project, they will carry on, go nest finding and fencing, and definitely carry on with the project.
Okay, thank you.
And Chris, you've had your hand up a while. You're on mute, Chris. I don't know if you know that. Oh. Chris disappeared. Anyone else got any questions? No, I think you're in for an early night. Fantastic. I'll find out what Chris's question is and email it to you as well, just in case it was something really useful, because he works for Forestry England, so it might have been to do with populations on Bodmin Moor or even Dartmoor. So yeah, we'll bear that in mind. But yeah, I think that's it. Thank you everyone for attending, and yeah, it's been really fascinating and interesting, and I hope that you know, the Bodmin Moor population continues to throw up surprises for you, and we get some more of those ring birds in Cornwall that we can report back on.
Oh.
Yeah, absolutely. Keep up the good work on Bodmin so far. It's
Thank you so much for this really fascinating talk. It's been amazing.
No problem.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thanks so much for your efforts on Bodmin, Jenny, and whoever else has helped. I'm hoping this year we can try and get a bit more of a systematic way of surveying Bodmin, help you out on there and see what we can do.
Amazing.
That'd
Thank
be
you.
great.
Thank you
Yeah,
so much.
thank you.
And I'll see you both soon.
Yeah.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Good night. Thanks for attending, and yeah, hope to see you all soon. Thanks very much.
Cheers. Thanks all.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you.